Welcome back to our War in Spain 1936 to 39 Balearics tutorial series. In the first two parts we planned our operations for blockading the nationalist controlled islands and how we would carry out the invasion of Ibiza. We have an idea how the invasion of Mallorca would be carried out, but the plans for that will be established in part 4. Today in part 3 we move from planning to execution. We're heading to the docks at Valencia, Mahon and Tarragona to further organise our naval task forces. You'll see firsthand how the game handles transport capacity and the hurdles you'll face when trying to move heavy artillery with light cargo ships. We'll review the operations of our Air Force, and we'll also coordinate our mainland forces in Valencia as they prepare for their first experience of battle. By the end of this video we will have definitely completed the first turn and moved forward to 5th of August 1936. In part 2 we saw that we could make task forces, and if we look at the list of all task forces from the top menu bar, they are all listed. Good naming standards can be useful if this list gets long, especially when the destination is a hex address rather than a named port. We have TF4, which we created to move cargo ships from Alicante to Valencia. This location text is clickable. Click on the hex address and the map changes to show Alicante. The task force itself is also clickable, so that one is not too bad because we know so far that it's the only task force we created going to Valencia. But all of the warship squadrons on patrol in the Mallorca Channel, they just have a hex destination. Let's be consistent and name TF4, the cargo ships, as the Alicante to Valencia cargo flotilla. No, let's leave out cargo as it's not a convoy carrying cargo. They are cargo ships, but we haven't given any orders to load cargo because Valencia has plenty of supplies already. Our list of ships in service from the top menu has many ships now with a task force listed as their location. Everything with a place name is an individual ship at anchorage in a port, and there's still a lot. Even though off camera I have now created other task forces to move ships to the main ports, and covered the sets of small naval assets, patrol boats and torpedo boats. The torpedo boats could be added into the blockade, but I've kept them in port at Mahon for now. In that task force we also have the important passenger ship that can carry about 500 troops in the Ciudad de Barcelona, or perhaps Ciudad. My Spanish is not great, I'm trying to learn how to pronounce all of these words properly. I think it should be Ciudad with Z for Zulu sound. We saw that this ship in real life was sunk by a torpedo from a submarine later in the war. I had a comment on the part 2 video from someone who knew the designer and people involved in building a monument to the international volunteers who lost their lives. That's in Malgrat de Mar, the fishing village where the survivors came ashore that's now a tourist resort. Representing the ship with the portholes along the side and the fists of the men who died raised in defiance of the fascists. I'm very grateful that this was shared with me. The game, by the way, absolutely represents the fact that if there were 500 men on board this ship and it gets sunk by the nationalists, that the units we loaded would be decimated or even lost entirely. Certainly all of their equipment and supplies would be lost. It's the risk we take every time we move men and equipment by sea. But even the loss of the ship when it is empty would be a real blow to our future invasion plans. We only have a few of these AP ships at the start of the game. The website about the monument mentions an Italian sub. All of the accounts of the survivors mention the sub as Italian, but in reality they didn't see the sub and assumed it was Italian. Italian subs were indeed operating in the area in 1937, and it was a reasonable assumption. But I think the truth is that it was one of the few nationalist subs that launched the torpedo. Still, let's review the situation on 4th of August 1936. The Spanish Civil War was just a few weeks old. The rebel generals launched their attempted coup on 17th of July. In the first weeks, the French had said they would support the elected government of the Republic with arms shipments, but had immediately faced severe criticism from the right-wing controlled media in France and a lack of support from the other democracies, notably Britain and the US. They were still following a policy of appeasement towards Hitler and to some extent Mussolini, so they pulled back from this position. By 4th of August, the French were suggesting an international plan where all of the major powers would agree to maintain neutrality. On 4th of August 1936, no foreign countries were involved in the war officially, and there were no Italian submarines operating. Of course, we now know that in secret, German planes and their pilots were already involved in breaking the blockade of Franco's forces in North Africa, airlifting units to the mainland. This was even before the Condor Legion arrived. But the process of foreign intervention in the war, other than that small number of German transport planes operating from North Africa to southern Spain, has not yet begun. There were no Italian subs operating against our shipping on 4th of August 1936. The game, by the way, does represent airlifting capability, air supply and paradrops and gliders. But we have no transport planes in this scenario. We cannot airlift men to the Balearic Islands. We have to get them there by ship. I promised some action, and we will end the first turn in this video. Before that, there's one part of our Republican forces we haven't seen yet. And no, I'm not referring to all the forces under the Aragon HQ at Barcelona. I haven't forgotten them. They are going to be assembling for the next 2 weeks. Then we'll assault Mallorca. We'll look in detail at these in part 4. I'm referring to our People's Air Force. The scenario files tell us that we are supported by a small group of Savoia Marchetti seaplanes. We have 5 air groups. Just like land units, ships and task forces, we have a button on the top menu bar to see them. There are separate buttons for land-based green and ship-based aircraft blue. We have no ship-based air groups. Obviously no carriers, but also no situations where we have warships carrying some float planes. But we do have 5 land-based air groups. 4 are in the airbase next to Barcelona and 1 at Mahon. As we noted in part 1, we have a major airbase at Valencia and there's ground crew there to support planes, but no actual planes. In some cases, when the ordinary men at the base remained loyal to the government, pilots flew their planes over to nationalist bases. Let's look at the first air group we have, Segunda Patrulla, Primera Escuadra at Mahon, which means the first squadron of the 2nd Patrol Group. Air groups is the generic name applied to all formations of planes in the game. Many air forces of the period had squadrons of 10 to 12 fighters or bombers. This is just 5 float planes, but that is not unusual for these sort of coastal defence squadrons. The type of planes we have in the air group are here, and as the picture suggests, the SM-62s are float planes. The game knows these are seaplanes and will only allow them to be located at air bases which have access to the sea, in other words, at hexes which are on the coast. The game will show us in amazing detail even the pilots we have available, and we can manage the replacement of planes when we have losses. In the longer term, we can manage the upgrades, replacing outdated planes with newer models. Just like the naval task forces and land units, we can also give missions to the air groups. But unlike the land and naval units, these already have missions at the start. You can change them, of course. But these particular planes are neither specialised as bombers nor fighters. And we can see the skills of the crew at the top, where air-to-air, reconnaissance, naval bombing, naval torpedoes and ground bombing are very low. And even ASW anti-submarine warfare is not good. The crew have trained extensively in search and defensive operations. We are not going to be able to use these types of planes and the crew with their skills to affect the ground war when it comes. In Spain in 1936, there was no independent air force, just like in Japan and the US, and these planes were under the command of the Navy with fighter and bomber squadrons under the Army. The primary purpose of these squadrons was in supporting the Navy protecting the coastlines. The mission they already have is naval search. They fly out across very wide areas and search for enemy warships and subs. We already heard in part 2 how a Republican float plane had spotted the sub that attacked the Ciudad de Barcelona. The plane was patrolling in the area and was probably from one of the air groups at Barcelona. I couldn't see any reference in any of the accounts by the survivors of which model of plane was involved, but it may well have been an SM-62. But as well as spotting the sub, it was also involved in dropping some sort of explosive device, a bomb or depth charge on the sub, before landing on the water and helping survivors. You can see in the armaments of the planes that they are equipped with some 100 kilogram bombs for use against subs. So the equipment is there, but the problem is the training of the crew. In a longer term scenario, we would want to initiate training to improve their skills in this area. Let's improve the naval search mission we have. By default, the planes carry out searches and attacks in an arc, and this is set for both at 360 degrees, a full circle around Mahon. We can change it by clicking on the button with the left mouse. The tooltip shows that we can set it back to 360 degrees with the right button. Click with the left button and we go to the map, and we just need to click twice on the map to set the arc. The start and end of the area we want to search, radiating out from Mahon. And then we can just click to the north of the Majorca Channel and then to the south of it. We want to cover the whole area of the blockade, so the air group concentrates on that. But because we are not defining a circle or square area, but an arc, then note the planes cover out further around Ibiza and beyond. We can see this on the map. Remember, we can view all of the hotkeys in the game from the H for hotkey button in the bottom left. And the one we want is Z for Zulu to show the graphical overlays. Remember, my settings blow up these windows to much larger than you probably will see on your screen. One of the options is to display air group search arcs, and we just select that. We can toggle that window off again with hotkey Z, and the search arcs are still being shown. So we could actually leave these on, and unlike War in the Pacific, which really suffered performance-wise when the arcs were displayed, these seem to make no difference. We can still smoothly scroll and zoom around the map. The green arc is our air group being highlighted. The white circles are the arcs of the air groups at Barcelona, and you see how far these come from Barcelona. We can't see the end of the arc for our own air group in Mahon, and it is searching a massive area of the sea southwest of Ibiza. If we thought national ships might enter the region through the Straits of Gibraltar and come up the coast, then that might be useful, but in this scenario it is not necessary. And we can just select the air group icon on the hex bar. The details window shows the range of these planes. Normal range is 58 hexes, and this is also reflected in the actual range in the middle here. We can reduce this by 1, by 5, or to 0. Conversely, we can increase it by 1, by 5, and to the extended radius. Note that this is orange to warn us that this can cause issues. The pilots might misjudge how much fuel they have and run out before they get back to base. Use it only when necessary. Let's bring that back to less than 58. 35 is about right. Now we are starting to see the edge of the arc, but something strange is happening. The arc between the north and south of the blockade area is open here, but closed here and here. We actually have the search arc the wrong way around. We are searching everything except the Majorca Channel in Ibiza. We want to reverse that. We can see the arc shows it is 264 degrees to 214 degrees. So that means it goes 264 to 360 clockwise, then starts again at 0, then 0 to 214. 0 degrees is always north. If you remember, I selected the north of the Majorca Channel first, then the south. Let's reset it back to a full 360 degree circle. We just want to do the opposite. Click to the south to start the arc, and then the north to end it. Okay, that looks a lot better. The text makes more sense. We are going in an arc of only about 40 degrees, and on the map, the area we want is enclosed in the arc. This is not intuitive. You have to think carefully before you change these settings, but the visual tools help a lot. So let me just quickly time-lapse this to set the arcs and ranges of the 4 air groups at Barcelona.
Viva la quinta brigada, rumba la rumba la rumba la. Viva la quinta brigada, rumba la rumba la rumba la. Que nos cubrirá de glorias, ay Carmela, ay Carmela. Que nos cubrirá de glorias, ay Carmela, ay Carmela.
Except this one, the first flight in the squadron. This also has float planes, in this case M18s, but its mission is set as Escort Close Air Patrol. I don't think it is expected to attack any enemy bombers or fighters over Barcelona. This effectively means it is not doing much. Not quite in reserve, but 4 serviceable aircraft that we are not getting much value from them. Let's assume that our other 4 air groups carrying out these patrols searching over much more defined areas will provide the assistance our naval task forces need to spot any enemy ships, especially in the Majorca Channel. It's a quite small area that 4 air groups will all cover. And we can try to get some reconnaissance information from these planes over Majorca and Ibiza. Change the mission to recon. Then remove the mission assignment percentage from cap and set it instead to 70% reconnaissance. We'll leave it as resting 30%. Then let's set it with a fairly tight arc and range. Reconnaissance concentrates on enemy land hexes, so it should only be carrying out missions over the islands anyway. I'm going to leave the target as commander choice, though we could give the commander an order to specifically target Ibiza town or Palma, but we will let the AI deal with this for now. Like the naval task forces, air groups cannot be directly attached to an HQ, but there are air HQs in the game, with one in the main hex at Barcelona. The text here about the Navy and the icon used on the hex bar is because there are 2 factions in the military, like the split in Japan between the Army and Navy, and that this unit is part of the Navy. There was still no independent air force in Spain, but the A for Alpha after HQ confirms it is an air HQ, and we can see it has aviation support. It has the longest range of any of the HQs, but it is fixed on the location of the HQ. All air groups operating in that massive range get bonuses. The commander, Contralmirante Rear Admiral Mullins, is dreadful in this role with his air skills at just 19, but we cannot appoint a lower officer to this role, and he seems to be the only general level officer we have available. At least his admin skills provide logistics bonuses. So our People's Air Force is small in number and lacking in fighters and bombers at this stage of the war, yet these float planes complement the naval operations that we've established in Part 2. It is not necessary to have huge numbers of planes to carry out effective naval search missions, and while they are unlikely to sink many enemy ships on their own, They will direct our subs, destroyers and the battleship to their targets. Our biggest concern is whether we can get any reconnaissance information on the position and strength of the enemy land combat units that our invasion forces will face. Capitan Bayo is our so-called simple captain mentioned in the scenario historical text. To note, he was not a ship's captain who was involved in helping bring together some of the ships in the invasion task forces. Alberto Bayo was a captain in the Air Force, an officer at the Barcelona Air Base, working with the air groups we have seen. Bayo was born in 1892 to Spanish parents in Cuba. Presumably they moved to Spain when the Spanish-American War took place in 1898, and Spain lost its last colony in the Americas, as well as losing the Philippines. This ended nearly 100 years of decline of the Spanish Empire. The enormous riches that came from the conquest of Central America and South America in the 16th century was gone. The last vestige of empire was in Spanish Morocco, and by the 1920s even that was under threat as independence movements fought the Spanish. After being educated in the US and Spain, Bayo began his career in the military in 1916 when he joined the Spanish Air Force as a pilot and therefore as an officer. But he was then expelled from the Air Force for being involved in a duel. Forced to join the army, he served in the Rif War in North Africa during the 1920s. He was severely wounded in action but returned to active duty a year later. Then at some stage, instead of retiring from military service, he moved back to the Air Force, carrying out what was a fairly junior role in the Coastal Defence Squadron in Barcelona. There is mention that he at one time led a battalion in the army, but I would expect the commander of a battalion to be a comandante. It is not clear whether he only served temporarily at that level or lost the rank when he left the army. This is not just a matter of a title. As a captain of the Navy, he would have been an OF5 in the modern NATO ranks. As a captain in the Air Force or Army, he was only an OF2. For someone who had been a military officer for 20 years by 1936, this is somewhat surprising. And more to the point, the evidence shows that he never commanded more than 1,000 men in a battalion, and maybe did that only for a short time. But in 1936, within a few weeks of the war breaking out, he was apparently commanding all of the forces we have started to describe. We have not yet touched on the bulk of our land forces assembling in Barcelona, but it looks like this. And the forces assembling to invade Ibiza, plus the 5 air groups and over 100 ships, including a battleship squadron. In total, the ground forces number 8,000 to 10,000 men. In many armies, this would be commanded by a brigadier general, more likely a full general, especially with the combined arms involved in an operation of this complexity. Our simple Capitan certainly did not have a simple task ahead of him.
Commander Bayo, this is today's brief prepared by your staff.
Please proceed.
First, the Air Force report from Barcelona Air HQ. They have reported 8 new pilots have reported to duty. This brings the total of pilots in training to 110. First Squadron has completed its transition over to reconnaissance and has carried out missions over 31 places on Mallorca and Ibiza, including Palma, Porto Cristo and Santa Eulalia, but did not fly over the town of Ibiza. The squadron commander reports that the range of 135 miles may be too short for the pilots to complete the mission. Ibiza town is the furthest away from the airbase. He asks for permission to extend the range.
Confirmed.
Second squadron has only 2 planes. With one needing repairs, there is only one serviceable plane.
Wildebeests.
Yes, Commander, there is only one spare wildebeest in stock. Third squadron has 2 undergoing maintenance and 1 in repair, leaving just 1 serviceable aircraft. Maintenance is expected to take 3 days. Fourth squadron has 1 undergoing repair. Reports from pilots of sightings of 9 cargo ships, another report of 2 cargo ships, and 1 of a destroyer with 11 cargo ships near Palma.
A destroyer?
Yes, Commander. The pilot reported seeing a destroyer. We have no other reports confirming this. Our planes attacked several ships, but none reported any hits. Sightings suggest there are 14 cargo ships in the port at Palma. Second, from the Naval HQ, no enemy ships were spotted by our naval task forces, but our subs and destroyers have all reached the channel and have begun their patrols. The battleship squadron has reached the area and is reported to be 25 miles off Santa Eulalia. The 5 ships from Alicante, including the passenger ship Ciudad de Barcelona, have arrived at Valencia, plus the cargo ship Generalife has arrived at Valencia. This brings the total ships in Valencia to 1 AP, 3 AK, and 6 AKL. We believe this now provides all of the capacity for the Uribarri column.
Has that been confirmed?
That will be done today, Commander. The same test will be performed at Mahon, a practice load to check everything will be okay on the 9th of August. Third, from the Levante HQ, Uribarri's HQ and logistics column have arrived at Valencia, and the third company has arrived at Loriguilla.
I don't understand. They were due tomorrow, and the third company, we were told, would arrive on the 6th at Castellón. Are you sure they have arrived early?
We are checking this, Commander. The report came from the Levante Theater HQ. We are also trying to contact Commander Uribarri himself. It's said that he is already in Valencia.
Please make sure of this. We were certain the column would not be available until the 9th.
Our plan was to launch the invasion of Ibiza on 9th of August when the whole of the Uribarri column is in Valencia. This is an interesting change now that we've moved over to playing the release version of the game. The Uribarri column HQ is mostly already here. Now when we click the unit organization, we can see that 4 out of the 7 components are already on the map, but the first company is still due to arrive only on the 8th of August in 3 days' time. The Zapadores, engineers and the cavalry won't arrive until very late in the month, and we've decided not to wait for them. Let's just rename them to follow the naming structure we set out in part 1. To always include the column name, we call these LOG units as logistics companies, and we will just number the militia companies. We saw in part 1 how you can set the planning for HQs, and this improves the bonus you get from your general commanding the HQ. But individual units also have a planning location. So the Uribarri militia column should have its planning set to Santa Eulalia. This would be important to try to get this to 100% if we were making an amphibious assault on Santa Eulalia and we expected it to be defended. It was already set to Ibiza when it arrived on the map. We can change it to Santa Eulalia with hardly any loss of planning bonus. We need to remember to do this for all new units we will get as they arrive. We can also note that the Uribarri column is already attached to the Levante Theatre HQ. We don't need to do anything there. That's the way it is set in the scenario files, and most columns arrive already attached to one of the 2 HQs. The third Uribarri company is going to Valencia to join the rest of the column for the invasion. From this window we can select the operations mode. combat move or strategic move. We would only use combat mode if we were in battle and advancing against enemy forces. Strategic move is available because we are in a hex with a railway. The railway connects to Valencia, but as soon as we click this button, the text tells us packing will take 3 days. It is really only useful to use strategic move by rail if you are moving very far across the map. We can march quite far along the roads in 3 days. Any of the other buttons will cancel that packing note. Let's carry out a normal movement by foot. We need to set a destination hex, and we just click on this button above. We go to the map and we get this orange arrow to indicate where the AI will send the unit to get to the destination. It will try to get there the quickest way. So normally that will mean using roads. In this case, it is a straight route to Valencia, just 2 hexes away, but you can see how it operates. Just click on the hex we want, and that returns us to the unit details window with the destination now set. These have planning for Loriguilla. Let's change that to Santa Eulalia. Note they form part of the Uribari column, and we intend to operate them as part of that column. Because Uribari's column HQ unit is attached to the Levante at HQ, it is not necessary to attach the third company as well. You will only need to do that if you intend to operate them as independent units. We noted in the daily commander's brief that Task Force 4 arrived at Valencia from Alicante. We have no icon for the task force on the hex bar, and if we click on the button for task forces in this hex on the bottom hex bar, we see there are no task forces here. This is expected because we set the task force to auto disband when it got to Valencia, so that the individual ships would go into anchorage in the port. We should see those 5 ships using the anchor button, and Ciudad de Barcelona is here. There are more than those 5 ships because there were already some cargo ships here, and another cargo ship arrived on the map today. Remember, the Barcelona can carry 520 troops and 1,150 tons of cargo. To compare the load requirements of the units with the ships we have, the easiest way is just to test it. Let's create an amphibious task force and just put the Barcelona and Tenerife into it. And now we again have a task force we can move around the map. But we can also disband this immediately and not leave it like this for the next few days. We only need it on the 9th of August. Let's try the order to load troops. We are presented with a screen listing all the units at Valencia in the port hex. The naval base services are light coloured. We cannot load them. They are a static unit. But the Uribari militia column looks fine to load. And when we select it so that it goes green, look at the bottom. We still have nearly 400 troop load capacity and more than 2,000 tons of cargo available. If we go to the 3rd Uribari company in Loriguilla, we can see its load cost is 430 troops. So that looks to be a problem. We will have slightly more troops than the total capacity, but it only needs 213 tons of cargo capacity. So we still have lots of free cargo capacity. The game will deal with this for us. It will cross-load the excess troops. Instead of putting them in passenger cabins, they will have to bunk down in the cargo hold. On a long journey, the troops in that case will be fatigued by this, but this is not a long journey. Still, we can resolve this easily because the difference is small. Let's return to the task force. These are just 2 of the ships at Valencia, and while we had no more AP passenger ships, we had more cargo ships, and some of them have proper passenger facilities. We can add ships to the task force using the commands on the left. Click on Transfer Ships. We get an interface like the Create Task Force screen, except we already have the task force with 2 ships in it and the mission set. From here we can add or remove ships. Filter the list for just AP passenger ships to confirm there are no more APs at Valentia. Let's add AK to the filter. I don't think we need another one of the big AKs like the Gran Canaria or the General Ifa. They hold nearly 200 troops. On the other hand, some of the small AKLs hold only 20 troops, nowhere near enough. Let's try a medium-sized AKL, such as the Vicente La Roda. It increases the total troop capacity to 855. That's perfect for what we need. And the Naval Base Services can report to Capitan Bayo that our loading test has worked perfect, that we definitely now have the ships we need at Valentia to transport the Urabari column to Ibiza on the 9th of August. Now let's do the same for Mahon. We only have AKLs like cargo ships here, but the units we want to move are small. Now load troops and we see a list of units in Mahon. All the static units are greyed out and only the artillery group and bridging engineers are available. So the first thing to note is we only have capacity on the ships for 80 troops. This is very low and not many units will only have less than 80. The artillery does, but the engineers do not. But the artillery also needs 1,340 tons of capacity for all of their equipment and supplies, and the task force can carry only 295. So this task force is not going to be able to carry either unit, never mind take them both to Ibiza. We can confirm that by selecting the unit, and we get the cargo load in red, warning us that the unit cannot 100% fit into the ships. So, lesson learned. AKL, like cargo ships, can be pretty useless for carrying out amphibious landings by our forces, even for the units we might imagine are small enough for them. The game does allow partial loads. It will break down units into smaller parts and load up just what it can. However, the ships would need to make several journeys taking a week or more. We want to avoid that. We would have less than half of the artillery in Ibiza when we first land. Select the engineers, it would be the same. Notice that the troops column is blank here. We didn't execute load on the previous screen. That's what we intended. But don't forget to check this when you really do want to move units. You must click on execute load on the previous screen to confirm, and then should say unit names here. We had intended to use the ships in Mahon to transport the invasion fleet, but now we have these ships which are of no use to us for the Ibiza invasion. They can be used for carrying supplies, and we have planned that supply convoys should come from Tarragona in Phase 3. Let's make this part of Phase 1, though we are a little late and could have done this on 4th of August by planning ahead more on what ships we would have available at each port. We can change the mission for the task force to cargo. Let's set the name and send it to Tarragona. So we have a problem now. How can we get our forces from Mahon to Ibiza? We recall from earlier in Valentia that we have large ships that started there, ships from Alicante and ships that just came on the map today. And we only needed the AP and one of the 3 AKs from Valentia for Urabari. So let's go back to Valentia using the location hotkey 4. We have covered most of these hotkeys already. Let's just summarize this now. You can set the hotkeys as you want, or not use them at all and just use the jump map or scroll around the map. I'm using 6 locations on the numeric keypad. The choice of the keys I made gives a relatively easy to remember pattern that works for me. Note that when we use these hotkeys, it centers the map on the location. It does not select the hex. Say, as I move around the map, that Valentia is still selected because it is shown on the bottom hex bar. So pressing 3 doesn't go to Mahon, it centers the map on the Mahon area. You still need to click on the hex, but this is a very nice quality of life feature that the developers have provided. So we are starting to see that we can use some trial and error, but also that as planners for an operation this complex, we need our staff to get their pencil and paper out and do the maths. No Excel spreadsheets in 1936, of course. And we cannot test the ships in Valentia when the troops are in Mahon. Looking back at the attempt to load the Mahon units onto the AKLs, we can see that we need this. And the ships available at Valentia have this. So surprisingly perhaps, a single AK, the Gran Canaria, can easily do what the 3 AKLs cannot. The cargo capacity of just one of these AKs can be 10 or even 20 times that of most AKLs. Despite the large numbers of ships overall in the scenario, we end up being very reliant on a few large ships. It's also a reminder that in the days before commercial flying, a lot of cargo ships had cheap cabins and would take passengers on board with them. Our artillerymen and engineers could go in the cargo hold with all of their equipment, but the cargo ship does have enough passenger facilities to transport them, if not in comfort, then at least without significant fatigue. I noted in part 2 that we also need an invasion fleet in Mahon for the components of the Karl Marx column to be moved later in the month, so it will be necessary to have sufficient ships also available in Mahon then. They have a lot more troops, more than Gran Canaria has the passenger capacity for, but let's accept that we probably don't have enough AP passenger ships to always load troops, and Gran Canaria can stay in Mahon to move the Karl Marx company in its cargo hold. Let's put that in a task force and send it to Mahon, changing its home port to Mahon so it stays there, and it will be ready at Mahon for the invasion on 9th of August. Give it a safe route to avoid Majorca, especially now we had a report of a possible enemy destroyer. Mahon has large stockpiles of supplies at the start of the game. These are visible on the bottom hex bar. In this scenario, we are not playing with the advanced economic model that is included in the game engine. In fact, the advanced economic model is only included for modders. Even the main campaign does not use it. Supplies are generated for us in the designated capital city. Because Madrid is off map, this scenario uses Barcelona to generate new supplies. Our cities on the mainland are connected to Barcelona by railways, and we have plenty of rolling stock to move supplies. The game takes care of this. But Mahon is an island. Supplies do not automatically move to it. We have seen that we need more ships in Mahon to move the troops in our 2 invasions. When units are transported, they can take with them supplies that are inherent to the units, but the task forces can also carry hundreds of tons of additional supplies and fuel to keep the units operational over the initial stages of invasion. All spare cargo capacity not used by the troops, their equipment and vehicles can be loaded with supplies and fuel. I think that the supplies available on 4th of August at Mahon will not run out in just a month, but we can usefully still show here how we can move supplies by ship. As we already saw in part 2, we cannot do anything with ships without a task force, and we also plan to make Tarragona our main naval base for supplies. Let's go there. If we view the ships at anchor, we have a number of landing barges and several AKLs. Let's ignore the landing barges. We have 6 AKL light cargo ships and a sailing sloop that is pretty useless but can carry a few tons of cargo. These illustrate an important point, as we can see that these are damaged. These numbers would all be 0 if in perfect condition. The headings stand for System, Float, Engine and Fire. Small numbers are acceptable, but these might need some repair if we are to consider using them. On the list of ships at Tarragona, we have a button, Manage Ships Under Repair. We see 5 of the AKLs are listed here. Note that without us doing anything at all, most damaged ships get repaired. These are getting repaired currently, so they already had 1 day of repairs without us doing anything. The game tells us they are being repaired in readiness and how long it will take. Readiness means they are being repaired while at anchor, and therefore they are still ready to be added into a task force and given an order. The game allows us to add them into a task force. That does not mean they should be. Ships with a lot of damage can run very slowly, might not be able to use their guns, or even be in danger of sinking while at sea. The default is repairs in readiness while the ship is at anchor. This is the most basic mode and takes the longest. You're basically talking about the crew carrying out the repairs. The next available slot for them is repairs at pierside. The ships are tied up at a pier. This is a much more efficient way to carry out repairs. They get to use the port facilities and the naval support there. But this immediately means the ship is no longer ready. It cannot be added to a task force while the repairs are taking place. This type of repair cannot be used when a ship has suffered major damage. With I1 selected, highlighted in green, the game shows that it estimates repairs at pierside for I1 would take 4 days. The repair estimates are here. That is probably okay for us. As we noted, there is no rush to get supplies moved to Mahon. If this time was 30 days or more, then there's no point at all in carrying out the repairs in this scenario. Click on Pierside in the estimates and I1 changes to show it is now being repaired pierside. Doing the same for the others, we reduce the overall time for repairs to 9 days, with Miguel Morale taking the longest. There are 2 better repair types, repair ship and shipyards. Tarragona is missing the 3rd option. This only occurs when we have specialized auxiliary vessels in the port. Both the Japanese and Americans made use of these in the Pacific to repair ships when they were long distances from major ports. They are in effect temporary shipyards. There is an ARD, auxiliary repair dock, at Valencia. So this is the only port in this scenario that has this option. However, Tarragona does have a ship repair yard. Most large ports do, and we can see that for I1 the estimate is that in the shipyard it would take only 2 days. Let's do that. Notice the message at the bottom of the window. The shipyards have a limit on the capacity of the ships they can handle. In Tarragona it is 2,000 tons, but the I1 weighs only 128 tons, so there's no problem. The shipyard still has plenty of room. In fact, all 5 of these small vessels can fit in the shipyard at the same time. Notice, however, that would not be the case for some of our bigger ships. We have ships that would take up most of the capacity on their own. None here at Tarragona currently, but at some of the other ports. We have ships that are bigger than 2,000 tons and therefore cannot be repaired in the Tarragona shipyard. Ciudad de Barcelona weighs nearly 4,000 tons. The port at Barcelona has a capacity of 4,000 tons, so that could be used instead, but our battleship Jaime Primero is too big even to be repaired at Barcelona. We have no way to carry out major repairs to it in this scenario, and repairing it at pierside, even for minor damage, would take many weeks. This means that because of the repairs, we can't send these ships anywhere with supplies for a couple of days. If you think this is urgent and don't want to wait, you could just ignore the minor damage to 4 of them, but it would be risky to use the Miguel Morale without repairs. We'll come back to Mahon supplies in 2 days. We have successfully established our blockade of the Majorca Channel, and we made sure that we have the right amount of ship capacity to carry out our invasion of Ibiza planned for 9th of August. We reviewed the operations of our Air Force and made them more focused on supporting our naval operations, and we coordinated our mainland forces as Ubari's column gathered at the port in Valencia. We completed the end of our first turn and reviewed what happened, and introduced Capitan Bayo as the leader of our operations, trying desperately to coordinate all of our efforts in returning the Balearics to the Republic. We saw how we can repair our ships and touched a little on the logistics system. Then we've seen the game moving forward to 6th of August 1936 with some shocking developments we had not foreseen. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking the video and leaving a comment. I would love to hear how your own invasion of Ibiza has gone and how you tackled the problem of loading your troops. And don't forget to subscribe to Cannae Gaming and hit the notification bell so you don't get left behind in Valencia while our troops on Ibiza advance forward to victory. I've been Mark from Cannae Gaming, and I will see you back in the Balearics at Bayo's briefing in part 4.